Hi, I'm Cece. 3 days ago, I found out my husband's been seeing my sister. He laughed when I confronted him, said I couldn't even afford a lawyer. For years, I thought loyalty would protect me. Turns out, it only made me blind. They took my trust, my home, and smiled while doing it. But what they didn't know was that I had already started recording everything. I always believed loyalty began at home. It's a phrase that lived quietly in the back of my mind, like an old photograph pinned to the fridge door. But 3 days ago, that photograph burned to ash in my memory. I remember the evening clearly. Ohio was quiet, the kind of late fall stillness where even the wind holds its breath. The lights in the house were dim. I was folding laundry in the den, the news humming low from the kitchen TV. Nothing felt wrong, but then again, it never does until it's too late. Mornings used to have a rhythm. I'd wake up before the sun, feed our golden retriever, Milo, and start the coffee pot. The soft drip of brew, the shuffle of slippers on the hardwood floor, the tap of my fingers checking emails, it was my quiet time. That morning, I reached for my tablet on the counter, not noticing it was Jack's. We both had the same case, black leather with a small tear at the corner. I opened it out of habit, meaning to check a grocery list. Instead, a conversation popped up. It was a message thread between Jack and my sister, Rachel. At first, I didn't register the names. I saw emojis, teasing. Then the words hit. Last night was incredible. You still taste like red wine. Her message. His reply. Your trouble. But I want more. I froze. My first thought? This has to be a joke. They're playing some prank. Maybe I'm misreading it. My hands trembled, but my face didn't show a thing. Trauma does that. Your body braces before your mind catches up. I scrolled further. The timestamps, the late-night exchanges, the intimacy between the lines. It wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. I remembered the first time they met, Thanksgiving, 5 years ago. Rachel had just moved back to Cincinnati. I introduced them in our living room. Jack brought her a glass of wine. They laughed about some childhood story. I thought nothing of it then. Looking back, I saw things I didn't want to see. Nights Jack brushed off my questions. The time he snapped when I asked if he'd talked to Rachel lately. Paranoid much? He'd said, walking away. In America, family is sacred, I whispered to myself, barely audible. But what do you do when your family breaks you? I didn't cry. Not yet. I stared at the screen like it held the answers. It didn't. Just more lies. More betrayal. When Jack came home that evening, I had already saved everything. Screenshots. Dates. Even their little code words. I didn't greet him, just nodded like I always did. At dinner, I said, I think I need to talk to a lawyer. He looked up from his steak, fork halfway to his mouth. Then, the smirk. That damned smirk. You? He chuckled. You can't afford a lawyer. He laughed. Full-on belly laugh. Like I was a punchline in his joke of a life. And that, right there, was the moment something broke inside me. Not the affair. Not even Rachel. It was the insult. I stared at him, calm. Cold. He didn't notice. He was too busy sipping his wine. Too proud of himself. He thought I'd throw a fit. That I'd scream, throw things, beg. Instead, I slept in the guest room that night. Milo followed me, curled up by the door. I didn't shed a tear. I laid there in the dark, my heart steady, mind awake. I thought through the next 3 days like a general preparing for war. He thought I'd cry. Instead, I started planning. 2 days after I found the messages, Ray texted me, dinner at my place this Friday. Just family. Come. The timing wasn't lost on me. She had never been one to host unless it was performative or when she needed something. This wasn't a peace offering, it was a show. I accepted without hesitation, not to make amends. I needed to see how far she'd go. When I pulled up to her house, everything was perfect. Porch lights on, candles flickering in the windows. The smell of baked rosemary chicken, Quinn's favorite, wafting out before I even rang the bell. Subtle, calculated. Ray opened the door like we were best friends from a Hallmark commercial. She hugged me with both arms, too tightly. I'm so glad you came, she said. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. Inside, Quinn was already seated, right beside her at the table. I stood still for a beat. He looked up, flashed that charming grin he used on strangers and salespeople. Hey, hun, you look great. I nodded, no warmth in my voice. Thanks. The others filtered in. Bernie, my mother-in-law, always dressed like she was going to church even if it was just meatloaf night. Teresa, our cousin who never stayed long enough to be helpful but always managed to weigh in. Dinner started with Ray talking too much, her voice slightly higher than usual. She served Quinn first, touched his shoulder while passing the wine. Every move screamed familiarity. So, Ray said as she settled into her seat, I've noticed you've been distant lately, Cece. I blinked, swallowed the heat crawling up my throat. You haven't returned calls. Missed brunch with Mom. Even Quinn said he's worried about you. I glanced at Quinn. He shrugged like a man accused of being too caring. I've had things on my mind, I said, keeping my voice even. Well, we're your family, she went on. But lately, it feels like you're pushing us all away. Teresa nodded, chewing. Yeah, you do seem kinda cold. I set my fork down. Maybe I just need space. But space from what? Ray leaned in, wide-eyed. We're not the enemy, Cece. Quinn's been trying so hard, and you just shut down. That word, enemy, sat on my chest. Heavy, twisted. You always take things the wrong way, she added, with a soft shake of her head. It's like you want there to be a problem. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I sat, still and calculating, while Ray rewrote the story in real time. Quinn chimed in, his tone casual. I mean, I just want to make things work. That's all I've ever wanted. I could barely hear over the roar in my ears. Then came the real punch. Ray's voice cracked, and she wiped an invisible tear. I just want my sister back. Bernie chimed in, as if on cue. You've always played the victim, Cece. Maybe it's time to grow up and face what you're doing to this family. The words didn't surprise me, but they still cut. I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. I knew then, I was outnumbered, but not outmatched. I smiled, just enough to let Ray see I was still breathing. Reacting now would only feed their version of events. And I wouldn't give them that. Not tonight. Ray raised her glass. To healing, she said. The audacity. I lifted mine. To clarity. She didn't flinch, but her eyes darted, just for a second. I saw it. As the conversation drifted to Teresa's latest date and Bernie's arthritis, I slipped into memory. Ray, homecoming queen, prom date to my senior crush, always first to be praised. Quinn fit her narrative. They needed applause. Constantly. I, apparently, was just supposed to clap for them. I didn't. By the end of dinner, I thanked Ray and Quinn politely. No edge in my tone. Just flat, unreadable words. Thanks for dinner. The chicken was perfect. As Ray walked me out, I paused in the kitchen, pretending to look for my scarf. I opened the top drawer and slipped a sealed envelope beneath the silverware tray. One printed message, just enough to rattle her. Good night, I said. She kissed my cheek. I hope we can talk more soon. I nodded. I'm sure we will. Driving home, the streetlights blurred past my windshield. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I picked up my phone and dialed. A man's voice answered. Hello? I said just one thing. It's time. They tried to humiliate me in public. I'll dismantle them in silence. The morning after the dinner, the house was silent as if it too were holding its breath. I woke before sunrise, not from pain but from focus. I didn't sleep, and I didn't need to. I had purpose now. The living room was cold and quiet. Milo lay in his bed, the coffee pot clicked on its timer, and I opened the laptop at the kitchen island. Light from the window showed the empty chairs around the table. Memories echoed. I looked at Ray's face next to Jack's in my mind, smug, secure, oblivious. The distance between what I believed and what had been true stretched wide. I opened the recordings folder, files I started saving weeks ago. I wasn't ready for war, but I wasn't afraid of one anymore. 3 weeks before the dinner, quiet nerves had driven me to install a simple recording app on our home assistants. It needed less than 10 minutes. I paid for anonymity, set it on silent mode, and left it running on the kitchen counter and in the guest room. At first I told myself it was just in case. I had a creeping suspicion but no proof. I wasn't preparing for battle. I was preparing for clarity. Then the files started filling. I listened now to impossibly late-night calls between Jack and Ray. Laughter that didn't belong to sisters. Comments like, "You still smell like the wine we shared," from Ray. Jack saying, quietly, "I didn't mean to get attached, but you know me." I pressed play again. The shock, the disgust, the awful calm of knowing. Trust is like glass, you don't glue it back, you replace it. And I began to understand. This wasn't about romance or desire, it was about takeover. Financial movement, quiet shifting of assets behind my back. I turned to the spreadsheets I'd pulled earlier, an unusual number of transfers from our joint account, money routing into a shell corporate trust with Ray's name on it. The truth hit me, Jack and Ray were planning ahead. Not just infidelity, but a takeover before I even realized I needed protection. My attorney friend Mara answered my call within the hour. She asked for details. I sent her encrypted documents. I told her, "I'm not ready to step in, yet. I'm watching." Her words were businesslike, "Gather everything. Don't alert them until you're ready. Let them make the move first." My response, "I've already started." I felt fury, cold and organizing. I used to cry over betrayal. Now I catalogued it. At home the next evening, I masked everything. Jack was in the living room drinking whiskey. I smiled. I acted like nothing changed. I asked him offhand, "Ray ever mention the new house project? The luxury edition she mentioned at brunch?" He cocked an eyebrow. "Yeah, a little," he said. I nodded. "Must be exciting." He laughed. "Too quick." My lips pressed into a line as I watched the flicker of guilt in his eyes. "Just a second." I said softly, "I'm sure she'll get everything she deserves." He failed to respond convincingly. I went back to my journal later, not for comfort, but for record. I wrote down exactly what I'd heard. Exact date. Exact phrase. I backed it up. Survival isn't about being louder, it's about being quieter longer. The case took shape. I created a separate account under my maiden name, moved residual savings quietly. I backed up all the recordings to a secure drive at a friend's house. I baited Jack, eliciting conversations about power and control while pretending to be lost in mindless tasks. I listened to him say, "I built this business. You just pushed papers." And somewhere between his arrogance and my patience, I found my opening. I wasn't begging for recognition anymore. I was setting the terms. A folder lay ready. The change of title documentation, signatures, audio files dated across months. I closed it and leaned back in the chair. I covered my phone with my hand and let silence fill the room. Then, an audio file with a recent timestamp. I didn't remember it. I clicked it. Ray's voice. "Once she signs those papers, we'll finally be done with her." My chest went rigid. My lips curved into a thin smile. They wanted to end me. They just wrote my opening statement. I saved the file in a folder named Phase 1. I shut down the laptop and walked to the living room window. The streetlights glowed outside. Milo's slow breathing echoed in the darkness. I sat there, no tears, just gravity. I was ready. The next family gathering came faster than I expected. Ray invited us down to Savannah, just a casual evening, some wine, some updates, she said like she hadn't spent the past month twisting knives behind smiles. I said yes, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I arrived in a crisp gray blouse and black slacks. Neutral. Clean. Not flashy. Not invisible. Ray's living room was polished like a magazine spread. The chairs were subtly arranged. Quinn was already seated at the end closest to the fireplace, the head spot. I got the armchair slightly turned away from the group, like a guest who'd just stopped by. Bernie looked at Ray, nodded approvingly. I caught it. Small things. Small power games. And I remembered what my grandmother used to say, power doesn't shout. It arranges the chairs. I crossed my legs, folded my hands, and listened. Not to the conversation, but to the choreography. Later, just before a group photo, Ray announced, "Oh, and ladies, surprise. Matching blue wrap dresses. It's our little unity theme." They all emerged from the back room, smiling like they'd won a prize. I stood there in my teal dress. No one told me. Ray turned to me with a soft smile. "So glad you brought your own color to the room," she said, like she hadn't orchestrated the entire exclusion. I smiled right back, glad to add a little contrast. It wasn't about fabric. It was a message. I'm not in the club. And I didn't need to be. I watched how Bernie looked me up and down. How Ray leaned a little closer to Quinn when she laughed. They were building their narrative and dressing for it. But that kind of staging cuts both ways. I made a note. Outward appearance only hides so much. A smart woman watches what they don't say while they think they're being clever. That night, the company gala. A local fundraiser for Ray's community wellness initiative. I had been asked to open the event with remarks. I'd prepared, printed notes, marked key phrases. But just as I reached the stage, Ray gently placed a hand on my arm. Actually, Cece's stepping aside tonight. I'll do her part, she's earned a break. I froze for a second, then smiled, handed her the notes, and walked back to my seat. No visible emotion, no scene. Inside, I was mapping her. She expected a reaction. Tears, frustration. Instead, I crossed my legs and waited. When she was done, I rose quietly, walked to the back room, pulled a different folder from my bag. My real speech, an updated one. Not for tonight. For the board. Different audience. Different impact. They thought they'd silenced me. All they did was give me a deadline. Back home, the shift settled in. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building. I sat at my desk, spread out every seating chart, invitation, bank record, text snippet. I could see the architecture of manipulation, how they boxed me out of roles, decisions, visibility. I whispered to myself, they've been writing this play too long. Time for a rewrite. I emailed Mara again. We needed to talk boundaries, timing, asset holds, legal steps. I wasn't waiting for their next move. I was planning mine. Before I went to bed, I folded a printout of the seating map from Ray's gathering. Highlighted Ray's name, Quinn's seat, and mine. I slipped it into Bernie's mailbox on my morning walk. No note, just enough to stir the water. Let them feel the edge of something they can't name. The next evening, I heard Quinn in the den, laughing. Let her play her game, he said. And I smiled in the hallway where he couldn't see me. He didn't know I'd already changed the board. The house felt quiet again, but not like before. This time, the silence belonged to me. I reviewed the latest recording, one captured just 3 days ago. The clock had started. They didn't know it, but every word mattered now. Every move was being measured. And I wasn't here to react anymore. I parked in front of Ray's condo in Louisville. I arrived unannounced, and I wanted the surprise. The driveway smelled of late summer heat, and the front door swung open before I had a chance to lift my hand. Ray answered with that bright, rehearsed smile of hers. Behind it, I saw a flicker of hesitation. I stepped inside carrying a thin folder, no explanation. I placed it carefully on the kitchen island while she watched. I think it's time we talk without the performance, I said. My tone was even, controlled. She took a breath. Cece, she managed. What is this about? I looked at the folder then back at her. You may remember this, I said and slid a photograph toward her. It was a copy of her DUI arrest from college, long buried by her father's influence and the family name. Ray's face changed. Guilt is a slow color. She tried to laugh it off. Oh, you're really digging up old stuff now? She asked, voice raised. I leaned in. Not old when it matters, and especially not when you're trying to hijack my life's narrative. Consider this a reminder of who began losing control first. Ray's hand shook for the first time I'd ever seen it around me. I said quietly, you have 72 hours to back away from the paperwork. I haven't filed anything yet. But I know how fast a court can move. She recoiled. You'd threaten me? She whispered. I smiled softly. I wouldn't threaten if you weren't worth it. Quinn's next on my list. A wine glass shattered across the island. Ray stood on its other side. I didn't blink. I walked out. This wasn't a declaration, I said over my shoulder. It was a warning shot. The next one lands. Next morning, I met Mara at her downtown cafe. We sat in the corner booth. I watched her stir her coffee while I passed her a USB drive. It held spreadsheets, transfers, text transcripts. I told her, we're ready. Mara nodded. Financial misconduct, coercive control, strategic concealment. Are we proceeding Monday? I said yes. She cautioned. We'll time it for maximum impact. I sat back and said to myself, sometimes justice isn't loud. It's patient. The mix of anticipation and certainty filled me. I was no longer a bystander. Later, I sent a congratulatory email to Ray about her promotion. I CC'd her HR manager. The email had a link labeled Photo Gallery. I knew she wouldn't open it. I could track that she did. The tracker pinged at 8:47 p.m. Ray messaged me, "You wouldn't." I didn't respond. Her silence spoke louder. I sat in my study, folder in hand, listening to the clock tick. Quinn's voice echoed from the den, "Let her play her game." I smiled quietly. He didn't know I'd changed the board. At dusk I looked out the window, the street lamps flickering like warning lights. I had already set the traps, placed the pieces, and now watched them move. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was directing. Their fear started with me. That night I called no one. I left the phone on the table. I thought, they wanted to break me. They built the stage. I held the microphone. I arrived at the boardroom around mid-morning, documents stacked in my bag, a quiet confidence beneath my tailored jacket. The door closed behind me and the slideshow flickered to life. When I saw my photo missing from the Founders collage, replaced by Ray's face, I felt a stab of anger. My heart thudded, but on the outside, I sat still. The chair introduced Ray with applause. I raised a hand. "Excuse me, may I clarify the timeline?" The room froze. Bernie shifted. Ray blinked. I opened the first page. June 12, 2017. Celestine Hargrave approved brand identity. Silence. Humiliation, yes, but now exposure. I flipped to a second document, my original design sketch from 2016. I passed it across the table. Ray sputtered, "We collaborated." I held up a video on my tablet, her voice in it. "Just attach Celestine's name and everyone will assume it's her work." Ray's cheeks flushed, Quinn frowned, Bernie looked away. I said softly, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them." It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. The shift in power was real, visible. The playing field turned beneath their feet. Ray stormed out, Quinn followed. The executives glanced at one another. I sat in the empty boardroom for a moment, letting cats settle. In my car afterwards, tears came, not regret. Release. Rage unclenched. I thought, I can't undo what happened, but I can redirect what happens next. I didn't rush. I let it land. Then I moved. The next day I met Beatrice at a quiet cafe near the river. We discussed amendments, trust transfers, official titles. I felt the weight of reclaiming control. I resigned as COO, but on my own terms. I would re-enter as non-executive chair, holding the keys. "The only limit to our realization of tomorrow is our doubts of today," I quoted. It wasn't bravado. It was strategy. I had walked through the dark and now I chose the light. Strength reclaimed. That evening I emailed the board. Effective Monday, I propose an audit of brand asset origins. I attached minutes showing Ray's metrics padded with credit from my work. I CC'd legal, finance, our. Ray shot back a cease and desist. I didn't blink. I watched the ripple begin. They raised their voices. I was raising the bar. Monday morning arrived bright. The boardroom door closed behind me. Ray sat across, Quinn to her side. I placed my file on the table and looked them in the eye. The chair said, "Your motion, Celestine." I leaned forward. "It begins now." It was time. I wasn't past this anymore, I was the edge. I walked into the boardroom that Monday morning, my portfolio tucked under my arm like a shield. The air was still early, the office quiet enough to hear footsteps echo. Ray and Quinn were already seated. Ray leaned back as if the room was hers, Quinn smiled politely at the members. I closed the door behind me and felt the weight of every moment that led here. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes, mine had long left mine altogether. I stood at the head of the table not by design, by intention. They set the stage for their play. I arrived as the audience. Now I ran the show. Miles, Quinn's son, cleared his throat and asked from the younger end of the table, "Why is my mom always standing next to Aunt Ray instead of you?" The question fell like glass. Heads turned. Ray's composure flickered. I rested my hand on the folder. "Because she forgot to ask if I belonged here," I said quietly. A murmur swept the room. Ray's nails dug into her glass. Quinn's face went tight. The betrayal I felt 2 months ago transformed right then. This wasn't just about infidelity or control, it was about standing up when centuries of narrative told me to sit down. Quinn rose, voice low. "You're playing a dangerous game, Celestine." I placed my folder on the table and opened it slowly. You're the one who gave it to me. I'm just reading it. His tone changed. My attorney will file tomorrow. I held my gaze and offered the video clip. Ray's voice said, just attach Celestine's name and everyone will assume it's her work. The silence became a verdict. Triumph didn't feel like celebration, it felt like clarity. I leaned back. By all means. He sat. They both did. I pulled together my final move, a motion for a full forensic audit of brand assets, titles, records. I revealed that the key files were already stored off-site, evidence timestamped, assets aligned under a trust in my name. Ray rose to object. I replied, you've already objected. Now you'll respond. My voice held calm power. I said, the best revenge isn't becoming what you hate, it's embracing what you deserve. The board debated. Ray and Quinn looked defeated. The boardroom slipped from their hands. Later that afternoon the press release hit. Rourke Enterprises asset audit initiated by co-founder Celestine Hargrave. I sat in my home office in Savannah, iced tea on the table, phone buzzing nonstop. News alerts. Ticker updates. I didn't cheer. I watched quietly. The storm broke, but I remained steady. I understood this wasn't the finish line, it was the first strong move of many. I typed one message. They handed me the key to the fortress they built. I walked through the front door of my Savannah home and felt the quiet settle around me like an old friend. For weeks now the routines returned, but they felt different, gentler, steadier. I poured a glass of iced tea and wandered out into the garden, the magnolia tree still blooming its heavy petals overhead. The early light filtered through green leaves, and for the first time in a long while I stopped waiting for trouble. Ray and Quinn weren't occupying my thoughts. Their faces showed up on news feeds, ticking off like background noise. Neighbors greeted me with a nod that wasn't forced. I nodded back. I made coffee in peace, walked Milo around the block without planning for backlash. I accepted a quiet normal. And I understood this. Resolution isn't just a court finding. It's the space you build within yourself to live beyond the storm. While cleaning out a storage box in the attic, I found the old photo album of my childhood, my parents and Ray, smiling at summer picnics, kids' pool parties. I turned each page slowly. I realized I had never mourned the sister I believed I had, the one I trusted. The grief didn't come in heartbreak. It came in recognition. Forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could have been any different, I whispered, quoting Oprah Winfrey but meaning it. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not the kind you send. The kind you read to yourself and fold away. After I finished I stood and looked out that window at the tree. The letter cleared space. I let the myth of family harmony rest in peace. An envelope arrived the next afternoon, sealed, plain, marked, confidential. Inside was an offer. Buy out my shares in the company at double market value. No name, no clue. I opened it while sitting across from Beatrice at our familiar cafe. I tapped the edge of the letter. Is this extortion wrapped as generosity? Or redemption disguised as leverage? Beatrice asked. I smiled quietly. I choose it on my terms. Later I drafted a counter-offer. Let's talk, but only if we do it on my porch. The message sent. Firm. Unhurried. I didn't want escape. I wanted power back. They didn't get to decide when I walked away, I did. A knock came at the door that evening. Miles stood on the step, sketchbook in hand. He glanced at me and said, Mom thinks I'm a fool for believing you, but I don't think you're the villain. He showed me his drawings of how he remembered our family, the way it was before it cracked. I let him in. We sat on the back porch, the mosquito net hung low, a southern breeze humming through the pines. Trust begins in small moments, a sketch, a shared iced tea, a quiet acceptance. Among the shards of betrayal I found something surprising, a new beginning. He asked if he could intern with me. I nodded, not because I needed him. Because I wanted someone who believed something better was possible. That evening I sat out on the porch with the iced tea again, this time there was no steel behind it. I looked at the board's email. Quinn had officially stepped down. Ray was under investigation. I'd been offered an honorary position, no duty, no seat of power hassles, just legacy. I sipped the tea and realized victory wasn't the point. The point was I didn't lose me. I didn't become what I fought. I only became who I am. I remembered who I was, and the game changed. The boardroom lights and the threats felt distant now. The yard sounded like possibility. Then the ping. A new message. Invitation. Keynote speaker, women in legacy leadership. I leaned back in the chair. My thought. Well, looks like it's time to pack. I closed the laptop and watched the dusk settle in.